Just to give everybody who came early an advantage later on when we have the raffle at the end of the presentation, this is my dog. His name's Rusty. Remember that. I'll ask it at the end. The people who are struggling later will not know. Well, thank you all for joining me. For the next hour, we're going to talk a bit about what I call design prototyping. My name is Dan Harrelson. I am with Adaptive Path. We are a design and strategy consulting firm based out of San Francisco. We focus on user experience design, user experience strategy, user research, that sort of thing, working across many disciplines. We work in pretty much anything that has any sort of a digital component, be it a website, a mobile app, consumer electronics, this sort of thing. I know that many people in the audience will be Twittering during this presentation. I know I would. I'm not going to try and stop you. Let's have this be a collaborative presentation. When you're Twittering, there's my name. There's a hashtag for the event. Let's use a hashtag of proto for our notes during the conference so we can all go to search.twitter.com and see what people are talking about, kind of see the back channel that's going on here. No reason to try and fight this power that's much stronger than I am. So for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about a few things. First, I'm going to put out an argument around how design deliverables that we use today in user experience design aren't quite cutting it, and talk about an approach that I call design prototyping that could help to get us some better design concepts out there. We'll talk a bit about why I believe that's the case. We'll then talk a bit about what I see as some rules for what makes a good prototype, and talk briefly at the very end there about some techniques for doing prototyping in your job when you get back to work. Before I move on, can we do a quick show of hands for who would consider themselves working in UX design? I'm guessing that's a little bit over half. And how many people work in what they would consider development or engineering? OK, cool. It's a different mix than I was expecting, being primarily what I consider this to be a developer conference. It's great to see that we're having so many UX designers coming to an event like this. I think it's really important and really valuable that folks who are working and care about Microsoft technologies are really focusing on UX design. So deliverables today. UX design processes typically end up with all of these different types of deliverables. I threw a few that we over the years have output at Adaptive Path, and I frankly feel like a lot of these are pretty boring, are pretty plain, and don't quite do the best job as they could in expressing the designs that we're coming up with, the experiences that we're trying to imbue into our products. We need to identify that design processes are dynamic. It's very rare, if ever, that we have a process where we go straight from the beginning to the end. We have no product, and at the end, we have something fantastic. Maybe a process kind of goes around and around in circles until we finally get to the best solution. Maybe you have a process that looks a little bit more like this. This is the sort of process that we tend to adopt at Adaptive Path, where we kind of go very wide, gather a lot of ideas, converge back down into some solution, go really wide again, et cetera. Maybe you have multiple tracks going on in your design process. The point being that design processes, have a lot going on. There's a lot of messiness. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening inside of them, and we need to be able to capture those more appropriately. What sort of stuff are we talking about? We're taking tons and tons of different input when we're talking about designing the best experiences for our customers. We're going out there and looking at what is the competition doing. We're talking to business and figuring out what sort of ROI metrics do we have to attain for this to be successful in the marketplace. What about brand, and how does that affect the UX that we're working on here? We talk to tons and tons of people. One of the most important, of course, is our users. We're in home doing ethnography. We're doing remote user testing, we're bringing people into labs, we're sending out surveys, we're gathering all of this fantastic dynamic information from our users. We're talking to internal stakeholders, and they have all kinds of different needs, and they're banging us with all sorts of different concerns. We're talking to customers, we're talking to prospects, people that you currently have using your current state of your product. We're talking to people who need to be sold on why they should be using your product. All of this comes up with some fantastic, very dynamic ideas, and then we make some really static, boring stuff. We output a sitemap. We output a wireframe. We output a persona. None of this is really alive. None of this really captures, in my mind, the dynamic nature of the work that came before it. The workshopping, the meeting with people, all of the decision points that came to be to finally come with the ultimate design that you'll be executing upon. So one example I think that I like of somebody who tried to do something a little bit different, who tried to bring some prototyping into his design process when coming up with a product, was Jeff Hawkins. Raise your hand if you know the story of Jeff Hawkins, inventor of the Palm Pilot. Okay, few, good. So for the rest of you, the story goes that Jeff was working at the time and was on the team for coming up with the Palm Pilot. And one of the requirements that he quickly assessed was this should be of the form factor that it fits in your shirt pocket. So what did he do? He went home, he took a measuring tape, measured the size of his shirt pocket, took a block of wood, and whittled it down to that exact same size. The form factor that we all came to love in the Palm Pilot started off as a piece of wood. He then took a chopstick and whittled it down to about the approximate size of a stylus, and he lived with it. He carried this block of wood around and this mock stylus for months and months and months. And as he and his team were designing all of the features, all of the functions of the Palm Pilot, he had this prototype that he could consistently, bring to a meeting and have to simulate writing on and saying, how does that feel? How does writing on something this size feel? He would, take a printout of an interface and stick it on there and say, how does that look? Is that cramped? Is it too big? Does it have enough room to breathe? At one point, the team was contemplating putting mobile phone technology into the Palm Pilot way back in the day, years and years and years before things like the Trio and the BlackBerry came out. So he said, let's hold this up to my ear. How does that feel? How does it feel to have this form factor, this prototype, be used in this way? How does this work? And so by living it, he was able to quickly assess the design decisions that he and his team were making day in and day out. So my argument, based on the static nature of what we create today and the successes of using using tools like prototyping, as we saw from Jeff, is that we need to prototype more in our design processes, in UX design. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a design prototype? Well, for starters, let's look at a bit of the definition from Wikipedia for prototypes. And I'll read this out loud. Prototypes allow engineers and designers the ability to explore design alternatives, to test theories, and to confirm performance. They do this prior to starting the production of a new product. For me, the core of that is the middle area there, where we're exploring design alternatives, testing theories, and confirming performance. Now, we have two different audiences that can be working on a prototype, according to this definition, and I kind of agree with this. I think and this is a good way to think about it, is we have engineers who are going to be sitting and doing these sorts of things. They're going to be looking at different design patterns for how they're going to build their systems and their app. They're looking at some theories that they have on how the product might work, how it could interface with the back end, maybe interface with partners, and they need to confirm the performance of their app. When they do so, they build a proof of concept. This is the kind of thing that they're working on. Engineers are tackling, what if we wanted to have a RESTful API, or what if we need to throw this new thing called servlet in there? Very, very valid for them to do some prototyping work around figuring out some of these inherent back-end engineering problems. That is a proof of concept in my definition here. Now, if we do the same thing and we have a designer looking at alternatives, looking at theories, looking at confirming performance, then in my mind, we have a design prototype. We have something where we're trying to figure out, is this easy to use? Is this too complex? Does this imbue the personality of the product that we're trying to deal with here? Is it slick? Or is it static? Is it dynamic? Does it really jump off the page? Does it feel safe and secure, like maybe a banking website would need to? These are the sorts of characteristics of the product that we want to identify through a design prototype. Another way to think about this, I like to visualize things a lot, is a Rube Goldberg diagram here. If we look at this self-operating napkin, which in itself is ridiculous, we can see that there's a couple of different pieces here. There's a parrot who eats a cracker who then kicks off the clock and a rocket goes out, and even how the whole thing works. Nonetheless, we're talking about the overall system might be something that an engineering proof of concept could tackle. But as UX designers, we care about this. We care about when the napkin interfaces with our user. What is that like? How does that work? Don't worry too much about this back-end stuff. Focus on, what is the experience that we're trying to tackle here, and how can we come up with a prototype that best articulates that? So why do we want to do this? What are my reasonings here for why we need to be prototyping more in user experience design? In a nutshell, it boils down to one big thing, which is that wireframes just aren't cutting it. They're just not enough. They're just not doing a good enough job. Wireframes are not an ideal communication tool for rich experiences that we're trying to express and we're trying to design. Wireframes are tough for people to understand a lot of times. If folks are not involved in the design process and they then are asked to look at this black and white series of boxes and lines, and maybe it's a high fidelity prototype and they'll get confused by that. Maybe it's a low fidelity prototype. That's even more confusing. They're looking at this thing and the amount of explanation that's required to really get across your idea, almost makes this diagram not worth it. Why not just bring a napkin with you and sketch it as you go? There's other little things like versioning. The number of times that I had to be on a call and talking to a client and like, oh, no, that department over there apparently has version 2.2 of the wireframe deck, and they're looking at page 5, and they need to be looking at page 6 on version 3. Things of that sort. You have these static documents that have been created that have been blessed, and suddenly they're sitting there and they're either getting out of date or they're just being confused. Wireframes require a lot of hand-waving. I was kind of articulating this a little bit a second ago, where we have these documents, that are just lines, and they're trying to express an interface that will have all sorts of motion and interactivity, and will have different states of it and that sort of thing. But it's most likely a piece of paper. It's been printed out, and it can't do anything. So you have to then start acting. You have to start, explaining to people, how is this all going to work? Case in point, okay, there it is. Let's say we were trying to come up with a new, great, fantastic iPhone app. Let's call it mobile apps. I don't know. I could come up with a wireframe that looks like this, and I could go, all right, so, Mr. CEO, here's the best application ever. This is going to knock your socks off. It's going to blow away the competition. How does it work? Well, you come here, and you see this little thing here. This can scroll. Well, take my word for it. It can scroll. And if we then clicked on one of those items, we would get the detailed view. And if we clicked on one of those little sub-icons in there, then we could edit that and maybe delete it, remove it from our stack, that sort of thing, right? So I'm sitting here, and I'm trying to explain this extremely static document, which represents something much, much more complex, through all this hand-waving, through all this dancing, through all trying to bring across the emotion of what's good and what's not, what's easy and what's not, versus just showing them how it works, this didn't take any time. I did this in less than 1 hour. I actually did the whole thing in less than 1 hour. And suddenly, this is something that you could email to somebody and be like, check it out. It's self-explanatory. You kind of get how it works. You get the core ideas that you're trying to express here by taking those very static elements of a wireframe and suddenly adding some motion to them, suddenly adding maybe even interaction to them. I mean, so far, this is just a demo. But what if you took another hour and you had it so someone could actually interact with it and move back and forth in state and said, oh, now I get it. Now I see how this is going to work. Now I see how this is going to feel. So beyond wireframes just not really cutting the mustard, a lot of times we're getting pushback now, especially amongst agile developers, that that wireframes and sitemaps and all these sorts of things, there's too much documentation. They're slowing us down. They're getting dated. We're having a hard time updating them. So prototypes can live, can evolve, can move along with the development of your application. This is a fantastic diagram that my colleague Leah Bewley threw into a deck that we did last year, and I think it really kind of drives home the message that if we're working in agile communities and we're doing some agile software development, we need to have more agile techniques for documenting our user experience designs as well. And by building a prototype that you can then make changes to, tweak a little bit, have it be constantly evolving documentation to feed into the developers, I think you can get a much better cohesion between the two teams, between designers and developers. And traditionally, waterfall-based UX design and agile development, they're not playing very well together. So maybe something like prototyping can help get everybody talking a little bit better. I think another really good value for design prototyping is getting internal buy-in. There's a wow factor there, right? There's something that isn't really imbued in a specification document and a wireframe. Those don't really zing. Those don't really get you. But if you build a small prototype to get your idea across, it can really help to sell internally. It can help you to get another department on board with your idea. It can help to get someone upper level management involved in here. And what do I mean by that? Of course, I mean you're trying to get some money for your concept, right? You're trying to get some budget. You're trying to really make sure that your ideas can move forward. And prototypes can be a great way for internal selling of design concepts. I think it goes without saying, prototypes are fantastic for usability testing. This is probably the place where people, by de facto, will start to prototype something. Once they get to the point to where they've done enough of the other documentation and they need to put something in front of a user, this is probably the time when they actually start that prototyping work, because they need to have something that's interactive, something that has a little bit of that push and pull response, because they need to bring people into a lab and they need to test with and that sort of thing. Design prototypes are great for figuring out exactly how a design concept is going to function. Really, how is it going to work? How is it going to feel? These are, again, things that you can't get out of some static documents. We need something that is working a little bit more, that actually has some meat to it, that we can actually play with a little bit, because there's no feeling in a wireframe. These things are just too static. At the end of the day, it's just that the experiences we're designing now are interactive. They're responsive. People expect to be able to push on your product a little bit and get an interesting response back. And they have emotion. Wireframes simply don't. Now, my absolute favorite use of design prototyping is to generate concepts, to actually take prototyping and have it be a core discipline in the day-to-day design work that you're doing. Going back to the Jeff Hawkins example over at Palm, actually having something that as you're making design decisions, you can validate those as you go. To quickly go from whiteboard to sketch to prototype within a day. Have that actually be part of the work that you're doing. I find that you can get some fantastic new ideas coming out of this sort of stuff that that you normally wouldn't get by just sketching some ideas out, by just talking about it a little bit, by just diagramming wireframes and this sort of thing. Instead, if you have this prototype, suddenly you're like, okay, that idea sucks. Let's throw that out quickly, and we can move on to the next thing. Or even better, that it starts to generate all these new great ideas. You're like, oh, well, if it does that, and I like how this is kind of working, what if it did this little thing a little bit differently? And suddenly your designs are getting that much better real time as you go. It's fast. It's fast. You get these ideas so much more quickly than if you were to simply design, and then and then build it, and then finally say, oh, well, okay, now I'm seeing it, but we're months past the design decision. So in order to generate concepts quickly, to validate quickly, to fail fast, as is the buzzword of the day, we have to make some good prototypes, and this typically involves making a lot of really good but difficult decisions. So what makes a good prototype? Well, first and foremost, it needs to be interactive. And of course, you'll first say, well, Dan, that little iPhone one you gave there wasn't interactive. Well, I think it is. I think anything that has a bit of motion, that is able to invoke a bit of the user into it, is interactive. Certainly, it's not as interactive as something that I can click on, something that I can touch, something where I can type in information and see how it responds in that way. But nonetheless, having a prototype that actually the user feels like they're part of it, is really critical as you're building these things. I mentioned a couple slides back that they need to be fast. We need a good design prototype. If you're using it day to day in your design process and really trying to help you generate concepts and validate concepts, you need to be able to crank them out quickly. Now, just how fast am I talking about? Maybe in an afternoon. Maybe what can we do, in an hour, in a couple hours, to take something from a sketch to testing? As an example, this is a prototype that was built using PowerPoint. This is available up on the Boxes and Arrows website there, as you can get the URL. And many people probably don't even know that you can make a clickable, interface inside of PowerPoint. A tool just as simple as that. I guarantee you, everybody in this room could open up PowerPoint and make this in an hour. If they had the designs, that they had the ideas ready to go, an hour, and you could have something that you could then show to somebody, or you could just internalize it within the team and suddenly be like, oh, you know what? That idea, when it was just kind of sketched out, seemed really great. Now I'm seeing it on screen. It's not working. It's not really doing it for me. Or, wow, that idea is good. We need to take that idea from this screen and put it into a different screen. Again, the idea is being able to use some tools at your disposal to get these done very, very quickly, to go from that whiteboard to an idea that you can have some faith in, very quickly through this prototyping. Design prototypes are best when they're disposable. Potentially, some of the engineers in the room will argue that anything you're writing, any code you're writing, anything you're building, needs to be able to take it all the way through to production. That we need to be able to be prototyping, be starting off in production-ready code that we can then take to later on. We don't want to be throwing things away and that kind of stuff. I frankly just disagree. I think you need to be able to give yourself that freedom to be able to say, I'm going to build something simply for the point of getting my ideas across. Because after all, it's about the ideas. It's not about the prototype. The prototype is not the thing you're building. It can't be so precious that you need to invest building it in production code, holding on to it, having it go all the way through into production. If so, you're going to be focusing on some of the frankly wrong things. You're going to be worrying about, am I using jQuery versus prototype? Am I using MVC versus not? I mean, these sorts of things don't matter when you're trying to simply get something out, maybe in front of a user, maybe just to test some ideas. You need to be able to divorce yourself from that. So making a conscious decision that this prototype is something that I'm willing to part with. an analogy that somebody at my company came up with that I think really brings home this point is if we think about marathoners. What's a marathoner do every day as he's getting ready to go and run that ultimate marathon is he jogs. He jogs every day. And he knows that all of those joggings are things that are in the past. He's done it and it's gone. But it's a buildup of his technique, of his form, so that when he finally gets into the actual event, he's ready to run. He doesn't say, well, I'm not going to train. I'm not going to bother, wasting these legs, on a run that doesn't matter. I'm going to do it because it's going to later on pay dividends when I'm in the real deal. So the same thing, being willing to say that building this prototype is a means to an end. Just like building a wireframe is, just like building a sitemap, a visual comp, any of these things that we're already willing to say are pretty disposable, right? A PSD never makes it into production. Eventually, it gets translated in some way into, cut up into imagery and all those sorts of things. Yet we've, as design professionals, are willing to say that, oh, you know what? Okay, I understand. At some point, that will be shelved and we'll move on. But prototypes tend to have this kind of cachet around, I'm building it and I need it to live forever, and I need to keep it precious and keep it evolving and use the code that I'm going to be using in my production site. A third critical area of a good design prototype is something that's focused. It's really easy to get caught up in the trap of, okay, we're going to dive in and build a prototype now. We're going to prototype the entire application. We're going to prototype the whole product here, right? We need to have the whole thing work. We need to figure out all the different edge cases and this sort of thing. And you quickly get into this morass of 3 months in, and you're still working on a prototype. Versus you could have had something done in a couple days or a couple weeks to really figure out what is the nut of that we're trying to solve here in the UX design. So things to focus on. Don't prototype, solve problems. Things that that are already working out in the world. Case in point, say a login form. Should your login form on your website work like every other login form across the entire web? Probably. People know how to use it. Don't reinvent that wheel. And don't worry about prototyping, people typing in a username and a password and hitting a submit button. It's kind of solved. It's not an area that you really need to test out a lot. Agreed upon solutions. Maybe you're building a prototype here because you need to get past a dam that's been built up, within your company that, someone in IT versus someone in marketing think they need to have different solutions. If you have an agreed upon solution, maybe you need to be focusing your efforts of prototyping somewhere else. Things to focus on, though, when you are prototyping is core interactions. What is it on your applications that's important? Can anybody tell me that typing 140 characters into a form field on Twitter is not the most important thing on that website? It is. So getting that right is important. If you're prototyping out the next dig and you're going to tell me that the dig button is not an important interaction, you're wrong. These are the sorts of things that as you're identifying, what you're building, the prototype that you're going to be building, you need to think about what are the core really important areas of my site. An e-commerce site, checkout, critical. Figuring out how your checkout process is going to work and prototyping that would be very, very valid for throwing into a design prototype. Working on important patterns. It's common that a certain interaction, a certain piece of functionality will be repeated throughout your app. Whether it's mobile, whether it's web, whatever the interface is, it's probably likely that you're going to be doing the same sort of thing over and over and over again. In which case, it's probably important that you get that thing right, that you really nail it. So prototyping that as well would be really important. And the third thing would be risky functionality, stuff that you're just not sure about, that you're like, wow, that might work, but wow, we really don't know until we throw something together here and prototype it a little bit. A technique that I like to use for figuring out that focus, for figuring out where you want to go, is looking at features that you're thinking about throwing into a design prototype and putting them on an axis of complex versus critical. To my third point there around risky functionality, things that are complex are pretty good candidates for throwing into a design prototype. If it's a multi-step interaction, across multiple interfaces or multiple web pages, whatever the app may be, might make sense. If it's something that's really, really critical to your business, it also makes sense. And so if you quickly start to identify something that is both critical and complex, prototype it. Figure that thing out. Throw that in. If it's something that is either not critical or not complex, maybe it'll kind of fall within that range of, a quick little wireframe will do. We don't really need to worry about building a prototype for that area because we kind of got it solved. We kind of figured that thing out, or it's just really not all that complex to our application. Case in point might be why prototype an About Us web page on your site. It's static text. It just works, right? It's neither super complex nor super critical. So maybe that thing kind of stays out, and you just do a quick wireframe that says it'll go here. Any questions about that? Any questions about what makes a good prototype? Anybody disagree? Okay. So with that, let's look at a couple of techniques for prototyping. There's two primary techniques that I'm gonna look at here and talk a bit about. The first being paper prototyping. Paper prototyping, in a nutshell, as the name would imply, is using paper to simulate an interface that we're going to be working in. Here's a sample that I found on the web. Somebody videotaped a kiosk where people were going to be using a map to be able to find locations in a certain area. By taking bits of paper, by cutting them out, placing them around, and pushing them, perhaps you can simulate interactivity by having somebody orchestrating the actual interface. As you click, as you touch, they will bring on and remove certain interface elements, things of that sort. Paper prototyping is extremely fast, extremely cheap, and actually quite valuable in being able to test ideas and be able to get some good responses back from your users. We use this quite a lot at Adaptive Path. We use it primarily internally to kind of validate our ideas. But every now and then we will take them and throw them in front of users as well. You'll find that you actually do get some pretty good feedback from your users. Even though they're looking at something that is just made out of paper and that you're pushing around and that sort of thing. Paper prototyping has really, really low investment, as you can imagine. It is, requiring colored pencils or printouts, some paper, and some scissors. You can quickly, get these things up and running, and you can simulate just about any sort of interaction that a digital interface would do. The more complex, the harder it is, of course. But things like scrolling, things like magnifying, multi-touch, whatever the sort of interaction might be, you can figure out a way to do that. Lots of good resources out on the web for doing paper prototyping. Lots of good seminars out there for being able to do that sort of thing. Second animal, aside from the paper prototyping, is digital prototyping. Being able to actually build something that works on a screen. This is an application that I built in, is that running? Yeah. In an afternoon using some software called Axure, A-X-U-R-E. I'm not paid by them. I frankly don't use this app all that much. But nonetheless, this is a point to say that that something pretty complex that has some pretty interesting interactions can be built very, very quickly. I literally came up to speed on how to use this software and built this in about 4 hours. There's 5 or 6 different pages. There's showing and hiding certain elements on the page. Imagine if you were able to show this instead of a static wireframe to an internal stakeholder or to a user. Imagine the sort of rich feedback that you would be getting from them by doing this sort of thing. In addition to using tools like an Axture or like an iRise or Fireworks or many of these other sorts of things, there's the world of just diving in and coding up yourself. Having somebody on your UX team who has some chops in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that sort of thing, be able to mock up your ideas is also a really, really strong way to be able to get digital prototyping out. A lot of times you can actually match the UI of your actual product a little bit better if you do that sort of thing versus using tools where it might be harder to marry up the two. Here's another quick example, and that's, is that playing? No. Yeah, cool. That's my colleague, Alexa, and she has put together a tutorial up on Boxes and Arrows about quick and easy prototyping in Flash. About, basically giving you just enough knowledge about Flash to be able to, stitch together a couple of different frames in a timeline, moving across those with clicks of the mouse, being able to actually have a little bit of logic about if the user does this, take them here. If they do this, go over here. Again, using the tools at your disposal to be able to create these digital prototypes can be really, really successful inside of your organization. Feeling like you have to go back and suddenly have to learn all of these techniques, all of these programming techniques can be really, really daunting. So knowing that there's tools out there that you can use, that you can pick up at your ready, can be really helpful. I mentioned PowerPoint. I mentioned Flash here, Axture, Fireworks. Any of these kind of things. Being able to simply stitch something together, do a screencast if it's going to work. Again, we're talking about a design prototype here that is just fast. That is trying to get the idea across, trying to take this sketch that you have in a notebook and bring it to life quickly to be able to assess whether it's going to work. Does anyone have any experience using any other tools? Anybody happy with them? Yeah. Fireworks? Okay. What do you like about it? Okay. 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 And how fast did you go from concept to finished prototype? 2 weeks. Great. Is there another hand over here? Expression blend? Great. And how is that working for you?
Well, the state engine is pretty cool.
Yeah?
The fact that you have shared objects between the different states. So the logic you apply to one object in one state will remain in the other states.
Okay.
You can create inheritance states.
Okay. It is cool. Yeah?
We do a lot of our wireframes in Illustrator. We've been using
Okay. Sure. Yeah, really, really fast. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Exactly, the transitions, that sort of thing. Yep. Anybody else? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So being able to use the annotations features in the Acrobat. Great. Yeah, one in the back. You want to come up to the mic? I'm sorry, I can't hear. Apologies.
Adobe Live Motion.
Okay.
It's like Flash, but it was Adobe's Flash killer,
Okay.
Allegedly. But it's the nice about it is that the timeline isn't this kind of crazy obscure thing. It's kind of like Adobe After Effects. So literally make a keyframe, and you can just build stuff really quickly in seconds.
Yep.
Much faster than Flash.
Yep.
And like this lady before about Illustrator, I use Inkscape. It's because you can just clone stuff really quickly and just draw it out in front of someone. So it's quite fast.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What's a smart code?
A smart board.
Oh, a smart board. Okay, to simulate touchscreens. Cool. So physical prototyping as well. Some hardware guy. What else? Anybody? Serena? Okay, what about it? The business units found that Serena was really easy to use. Great. Another one over here.
It's a WAIR application mock-up.
Okay.
It does a lot of
Is that the balsamic one, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And print out tons of those and do a lot of the stop motion type of touch wire.
Right. Has anyone else seen Balsamic, the Air app? It's really cool. Check it out when you get out of here. One of the really neat things about it is all of the interface elements are sketchy, so it looks like a line-drawn application, which can really help to kind of disarm the person who's looking at it. So often, if you show a really high fidelity design or a prototype or anything of that sort, and they see that it's really finished, they tend to not want to give a lot of good feedback, because they're like, oh, well, you did all that work already. I don't want to tell you something and have you go back and redo it. And of course, you're like, no, I want the feedback. Nonetheless, this is being able to have it look like a sketch can be really, really helpful in that way. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So he said Visio, clickable prototypes. How does that work? I haven't done it myself. Okay.
That can be external to the application or to a page specifically.
Cool. Okay. Anybody else? Cool. Those are lots of great ideas. What I liked about a lot of those ideas as well is, actually, I don't think anybody mentioned that they're coding. Is anybody code? Is anybody actually have somebody on staff who is kind of the prototyping guy that he does some coding and that kind of stuff? Yeah, in the back. You want to tell me about it?
We do a lot of our interactive prototypes with Silverlight.
Okay. So you have a Silverlight developer that actually makes your interactive prototypes. Okay. And what does he use for source? Is he using blend files from the designers, or? How is the Silverlight developer working with other UX designers?
Well, we're a pretty small shop, so he does a little bit of both.
Oh, okay.
He's the developer and designer. So works directly with customers, comes up with wireframes, PowerPoint, all things like that.
Okay. 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 Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in a nutshell, he's saying he's the UX designer, and it's quicker for him to actually code it up than to have to explain to somebody how updating works and that sort of thing. Yeah. Right. Helps with speed in what way?
Well, the motion has been defined at the early stage. The code that exists for motion happening is already existing. So the level
Good. Okay. Well, I went a little bit faster than I was expecting, so we're on to this slide already, where just to kind of sum up what I've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so is this idea that we really do need to embrace prototyping. We need to figure out how we can get this into our UX design processes more deeply. We need to really have it ingrained in there. We need to not have it be some afterthought or something that we just do occasionally, and have it be a core deliverable. And in order to do so, we need to really accept that design prototypes are best when they're fast, when they're disposable, and when they're really focused on what are the certain areas that we need to work on, that we need to tackle. So with that, I'll go back to the room and say, are there any questions or any comments? We do have a mic in the back there, which I think might make it a little bit easier, or you can just kind of yell from your seat. So yeah.
I was just going to say, we do a lot of prototyping just with HTML.
Uh-huh.
Just doing simple markup, and if you're running certain form elements and just doing that. So I actually agree with you a lot for prototypes. I didn't think anybody else mentioned just writing the HTML.
Okay.
So I thought that's another one that's really rapidly.
Absolutely. So doing HTML and tools like Dreamweaver. Yeah? The slide where I crossed out development and said prototyping instead? Was that the sketchy one with the big red arrow? No. So, okay. So that wasn't saying that doing prototyping instead of development. That was using prototyping as a feed into development. So if you are doing agile software development, and you're doing your sprinting, and you have your developers who are sprinting along as they go, the design team needs to be feeding them requirements, right? They need to be feeding them something about where the app needs to be going, what they need to be designing and building next, that sort of thing. You can give them a wireframe, or you can give them a prototype, right? So the idea is if we are giving our software developers prototypes instead of wireframes, they can work that much faster. And traditionally in agile development, one of the big mantras is to reduce documentation. And if we build prototypes instead of building these stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of wireframes, I think we can help to reduce that documentation. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah?
Has any of your really good prototypes ever caused the sponsor to think or wonder why the app would take so much longer to develop? Because it looks like it's almost done.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So he's talking about the fidelity problem where the prototype looks so good that people say, oh, looks like it's almost done. You should be able to have this done in like a week, right? Is that the idea? Right, and so now you have the developers who are like over here saying, what the hell are you doing to me, buddy? You're making me look bad, And of course, the arguments are, well, he's not hooked up to any back-end systems yet. It doesn't, maybe validate across all the different browsers and blah, 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 blah. Absolutely. I mean, you're kind of now in a different kind of conversation, a different miscommunication world. Prototypes certainly aren't perfect in any way, and so you have to certainly deal with that. And levels of fidelity and these sorts of conversations are still going to arise. Absolutely. Let's talk to them, I mean, absolutely, yeah. So making it look sketchy is one certainly really good idea to get across. But if you're realistically, if you're at that point in it, it's probably that the design is so polished already that your prototype is also looking very polished. you're probably past the sketchy part, you know, and so maybe you're in a world where it just has to be some really good communications around that, you know, making sure you're talking to the developer and team and saying, hey, you know, come in with me and let's present this together, and I'll talk about how it's half-baked and it's just, you know, a UI concept, and you can also kind of back me up on that and answer questions around how long is it going to take to make this vision, because that's really all it is, right, is a vision of where we're going to go, a reality. Other questions? Yeah.
I teach at the IIT Institute of Design, so there's no so we know the power of prototyping.
Okay.
The real question is, if prototyping is the tool for fuzzy front-end design, how do you get clients to actually invest in this fuzzy front-end? Because the problem is they don't actually see something coming out of a prototyping session. They only see it as sort of disposable, random stuff that you're doing as designers.
What do they get out of a workshop where they're writing on whiteboards, right? Same thing. I mean, they're getting ideas out of it. They're generating notions.
So how do you get clients to invest in that part of the design
invest
process?
in a prototype that they have to throw away? Oh, probably some of it's just blind faith, saying this is where we're going to go, this is where the project is going to go. But kind of letting them know the value of why we're doing this. You know, talking to them a lot about how this is the best way to get our ideas forward, and saying that this is an artifact. This is, amongst all the other artifacts that the design process is creating, this is also one of those. And hopefully it's going to be done in a way that's not so heavy and so expensive and takes so much time that they really even have to question it. If it just happens, and as you're going through a 3 or 4 month, you know, say design engagement, and at the end there's a prototype that comes out of it, you know, they're none the wiser. They don't necessarily know about all the other artifacts you're building and how long those take. They just know that design takes time, right? You know, because you say so. But you know. Being able to kind of broach it in that way. I think I saw another hand over here with a response, maybe?
Well, yeah, I was thinking on that topic, I think one of the important things is educating your clients on the importance of prototyping and how to improve the end product. So I think to the point of how you sell a client on educating them on what the process is.
Education can help a lot, yep. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. So in a client engagement, making sure your prototype kind of doesn't extend the scope of work. Yeah, and have them, you know, now be assuming that they're getting more free work, you know, versus like, oh, well, I'm prototyping phase 2, you know, kind of thing. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. In the far in the back, yeah.
Yeah, one of the ways we do that with clients when we want to kind of get them to buy into prototypes is we explain to them that if we don't do this prototype, we come up with a design and we develop it, the cost of change after the fact is much higher than the cost of change during the prototype.
Okay.
So if we explain it to them in those kind of terms, and they kind of understand that, yeah, we're messing around now, we're spending weeks. Once I code this,
Yep.
it's going to be weeks and weeks.
So explain the cost of not prototyping, of the, you know, of that mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anybody else got a question or a comment or want to call BS on anything I've said up here? Yeah.
Almost like wireframing, you have to work with all these things on pages, using stats, I've almost limited our creativity because
Yep.
maybe use a tool like say Prezi, a web-based application editor.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's very, very cool. But I was looking at that, and my first thought was, I would never have done, period, I would have done it in wireframing. Is it possible the tools are actually
Yep. So the overall question for the room is, are our current set of tools, things like wireframes that are static and things like that, limiting us, limiting our ideas, limiting the potential designs that we're coming up with, versus doing things like prototyping, actually building something? Does that help to broaden our mind and kind of see more than we can see if things are just static, page-based, states? Yeah, I think yes. I think the answer is yes. And that's why, while there's lots of great uses of prototyping, the one that I kind of hammer home is putting it into the design process, making your actual designs better. Not just designing and using prototyping to test that what you did was good, but actually, as you're going through there, seeing it come to life and suddenly be like, oh wow, we should be doing this, or we should be going there, or again, this is crap, let's drop it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. My question was about what your thoughts are about prototyping for interfaces like Surface, where you have this layer of what the body's doing,
yep,
and then what is visually seen. So is adaptive pathing anything with that, or do you have thoughts about that?
We are. I actually had a slide in here that I had to pull because I didn't have time to get it together around surface design. Absolutely. I think prototyping in this way is certainly not something that needs to simply be in the realm of the world of digital. For this conference, for a lot of what we do, I think that it's easy to talk about it in that way, but prototyping for the physical, prototyping for services, being able to figure out what's it going to be like when somebody comes into the auto dealership and needs to purchase a car or to deal with service. What's that overall service like? How are they interacting with people? How are they interacting with kiosks or displays, with printed material, multi-channel design as well? Absolutely. I think prototyping can solve those just as easily. It would just be a different tool set, right? It would be working with big pieces of cardboard to fabricate, say, a kiosk or a display or a chair or something of that sort. In consumer electronics, prototyping is part of what they do. I mean, this is actually a little bit newer to, I think, the digital world, in that you're working on building a car, you're building a new pencil, you're building a new consumer electronics device. Often you do that prototyping out of styrofoam, out of 3D printers, or you're just kind of modeling it as well on the computer screen. So yeah, I absolutely think that prototyping can be fantastic for service design.
Okay, so along that line too, how important do you think it is to actually have a reference for maybe either video of people moving in order to think about like how they're actually moving, and that would be incorporated with, say, a visual interaction. Like, for example, I think some of the things that we've found a need to do is videotape someone moving and then lay the graphics behind that, like compositing it, so that you could visualize that for somebody who would really maybe not even be able to, like a client that might not be able to imagine that or something.
Sure. So you're saying videotaping people in kind of generic poses and then being able
not
to...
Not poses, because poses are static, but I mean like motions.
Motions and that sort of thing,
yeah.
and then digitally compositing in your design ideas into it. Sounds intriguing. Certainly not something that I've worked in personally, but the idea sounds like it could be very, very useful. Yeah, for sure. Have you tried it out?
Yeah.
And are you having success with it?
Yes. And well, you really quickly find out what won't work.
Okay.
But you also find out a lot of, great possibilities. So
okay.
I would say.
Good.
It's a good thing to try if you're in that area.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, I will ask you to fill out evaluation forms as you could once you've left. A lot of people are already gone, but Rachel in the back there will take those. And I appreciate your time. Coming up and asking any more questions if you have them. Thank you.